Hey folks, one of the Year of Darkpaw events this year to celebrate EverQuest's 25th anniversary is an Ask Me Anything, and we got the responses yesterday. There's a ton of stuff in here, mostly people asking for a feature and the devs saying no, but there's one that really caught my eye about their encounter locking system, commonly called FTE. I think the dev may just not be fully informed about how this thing works out in the wild, so I'm going to do a deep dive in this video to demonstrate some of the issues that still need to be resolved. Let's jump right in. Okay, first things first, here's the question and response from the AMA. What is something you worked on that was really difficult to do? What made it difficult? Miko, encounter locking. The kill stealing prevention was relatively straightforward to implement, but the anti-training mechanic was difficult. There are a lot of ways that NPCs can pick who to aggro, when, and why. Each of those ways had to be considered in a solution tailored to fit each that accomplished the feature's goal while also having minimal other impact. I think the feature is currently in a good spot and has come a long way from the first iteration released on test. Like any feature, though, there's always room for improvement. Alright, I totally believe him that this was difficult and appreciate he recognizes that there is room for improvement, but I'd like to make the things that need to be improved a bit more concrete to everyone and offer a couple solutions that may be more manageable from a technology perspective. And don't get me wrong, it's definitely improved a lot versus the first version we saw on this on test almost a year ago now, but there are some things they really need to be made aware of that need improvement before the system is used on another server if they want that server to flourish. So I'm going to highlight 4 things in this video. The first related to group content, and the last 3 related to raid content that I think should be priorities to address. First, it's still relatively easy to maliciously train people now if you know how to do it. And trust me, basically anyone who wanted to do this has already figured it out, so this shouldn't be new information to them. The main issue is that after the patch last September, I think it became much more difficult to unlock mobs. An unfortunate byproduct of this was that if you did manage to get a mob to transfer its aggro onto someone else, they are not able to interact with the mob, so you've effectively trained them with an immortal mob. I explained all this during the 1-week test patch period back then, but nothing was done to address it at the time, and it still has not been dealt with. Here you can see an example where the mobs are aggroed to my warrior, but he can't defend himself. This isn't a theoretical concern, and has come up quite a bit when someone trains mobs past a group doing beneficial AEs. The puller will have very minimal aggro from tagging, but then, for example, a bard playing Lucia's will get chain aggro from buffing the puller with a song, and all the mobs hop onto the other group while still being locked to the puller. This was happening pretty much non-stop for a week or so in the deep. I think the guy was eventually suspended, maybe. Second, while we're on the topic of training, this has really done nothing to address training of raid bosses. Here's a real-world example in North Temple of Vishan. My guild is happily killing Lady M, and you can see a lone wizard from a competing guild named Omni runs into frame, training Sevalak onto us. After the wizard dies, the dragon just walks back to its spawn. Now you might ask, well, isn't that all working as intended? Here's the problem. If you do that with a dragon that has a nasty AE effect, you can just drag it around any corner or hiding spot the guild would normally use and fuck them all pretty hard. Even though the boss is locked to someone else, its AE would still hit your raid, and there's nothing you can do to drag it away or such. It basically will only leave after the person who was training it has died. The issue is that if uncorrected and one of these servers has more than one large open world guild on it, this will make raid zones like North Temple of Vishan super toxic. You can just leave the triplets up, and no one can really go for Vulak if that Hoshkar clone is still alive. Third, there was this strange feature of how encounter locking interacted with the Challengers perk that meant a player could basically bind rush down an MONTM mob. Normally someone would just step in near the end and kill it, since that first player's DPS would get wiped after each time they died, but with encounter locking, no one could engage with it still after it died, so they could just slowly whittle it down, making hundreds of corpses in the process. The last patch did partially address this, at least I think that's what they were aiming for, but apart from fear, the other main place this happened was Kale, where we saw groups try to kill Vendi and Era with a handful of people, or here you can see a guild just pure cycling on Avatar of War, where a much stronger force is sitting there locked out. P.S. We still won that fight even after being locked out at 72%.
God, this is gonna hurt. Here it is.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Okay, last but not least, the current implementation of encounter locking is mob specific. There's no consideration of multi-mob events. I've posted a few examples of how this plays out when they had the system active on test server. So for example, here you can see the Valenczek event where all the pops are just randomly locking to different groups. Fun, right? So you may be asking yourself, who gives a fuck about VZ? Fair. Here's another scenario. Statute of Ralazek, Idol of Ralazek, and Avatar of War are all independent lock groups. So spawning AOW by killing Idol doesn't lock it to your raid. It's just whoever tags Avatar of War first. Now, the devs did recognize that this is a problem and agreed to turn off encounter locking on some mobs, but it wasn't done correctly. Like, for example, Vulak and Emperor Straw still had encounter lock enabled, even though Negreth said it would be turned off. So they need to revisit that and also include the planes of power bosses we mentioned from that thread. Like, how fun will it be if you're doing open world Kornov and someone comes down there and tags one little mob from the waves and just sits there locked with it until your timer is blown? But all of that's not really addressing the right answer to this, which is either to remove bosses from open world zones entirely and make them DZ only, or remove encounter locking from zones that have bosses in them. I heard someone suggest removing it from Mark of the Mighty bosses only, but there's so many events that have additional mobs that are part of them, like Kornov, the example that I just gave, that I don't think that'll really work very well. That would at least fully address the last three of these things I've highlighted here, and I believe in general the type of player that goes for open world in any case is the type of player that's just gotten used to DPS race as a mechanic anyway. Oh, one other thing I found a bit strange in Miko's response was that he used the phrase kill steal. I was under the impression that kill stealing was not actually a thing anymore since removal of the Everquest PNP. Maybe that was just a slip of the tongue and not an official Daybreak reversion to previous policy. Who knows, really? Now you may say, but all of this worked fine on Oakwind, didn't it? Well, no. I've shown all the examples in this video from Oakwind or test, and the main thing you need to keep in mind was that there was only really one aggressive open world guild on Oakwind, so the kind of competition you would see, that you will see on a future popular server, just didn't come up. Alright, hope you were listening this time, Miko, and can improve this for the players. And good luck out there, everyone.